Te reo ererangi o te mānia. This episode was produced in Otatahi by Plains Media, with support from New Zealand On Air.
You're listening to The Marvellous Land of Oz, the sequel to The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, on Spin Me a Tale, broadcasting on Plains Media. I'm Jazz. Join me to take a look at what's happening in the Land of Oz today. Tip and his friends were sitting in a field trying to find new ways to fix the sawhorse's now broken leg when the Tinman lifted his head and looked out across the field and said, "What kind of creature is that one there? The one coming towards us?" The others all stopped and looked where he was looking, and they discovered something coming towards them. It was the most extraordinary object they had ever seen. It flew quickly and noiselessly over the soft grass, and in a few moments it was standing before the adventurers and greeted them with an astonishment equal to their own. The Scarecrow was, all things considered, rather calm, and he was also the first to speak. "Good morning," he said politely. The stranger removed his hat with a flourish, bowed very low, and then responded,
"Good morning. I hope you're all doing very well. Here, take my card."
With this courteous speech, it extended a card towards the Scarecrow, who accepted it, turned it over and over, and handed it with a shake of his head to Tip. The boy read the card out loud. "Mr. H. M. Wogglebug, T.E." "Dear me!" shouted the Pumpkinhead, staring somewhat intently at their new friend. "How very peculiar," said the Tin Woodman, very confused. Tip's own eyes were round and wondering, and the sawhorse uttered a sigh and turned away its head to look back at its own broken leg. "Are you really a bug?" inquired the Scarecrow.
"Most certainly, my dear sir,"
answered the stranger.
"Is my name not on that card?"
"Well, it is," said the Scarecrow. "But if I might ask, what does HM stand for?"
"HM means highly magnified,"
returned the Wogglebug quite proudly. "Oh, I see." The Scarecrow viewed the stranger quite critically up and down. "And are you, in truth, highly magnified?"
"Sir,"
said the Wogglebug with a hand on his chest.
"can't you see that I'm several thousand times bigger than any other Wogglebug you ever saw? Therefore, it seems pretty obvious to me that I am highly magnified. There is no good reason why you should doubt it."
"Oh, of course, I'm sorry," returned the Scarecrow. "My brains are still slightly mixed from the last time they were washed. Can I please ask, what does the T.E. at the end of your name stand for?"
"Those letters express my degree," answered the Wogglebug with a condescending smile. "To be more explicit, the initials mean that I'm thoroughly educated. T.E.
"Oh," said the Scarecrow, much relieved. Tip could not take his eyes off this wonderful creature. What he could see was a great, round, bug-like body on top of two slender legs that ended in delicate feet, with the toes curling upward. The body of the Wogglebug was rather flat, and judging from what could be seen of it, it was a glistening dark brown colour upon the back, while the front was striped with alternate bands of light brown and white, blending together at the edges. Its arms were fully as slender as its legs, and upon a rather long, curvy neck was perched its head, not unlike the head of a man, except that its nose ended in a curling antenna, and its ears from the upper points had antennae that decorated the side of its head like two miniature curling pigtails. It must be admitted that the round, black eyes were rather bulging in appearance, but the expression upon the Wogglebug's face was by no means unpleasant. This dapper insect wore a dark blue swallowtail coat with a yellow silk lining and a flower in the buttonhole. He was wearing a white vest that stretched tightly across his wide body, and loose-fitting trousers of a fawn-coloured plush. Fastened at the knees with gilt buckles, and perched upon its small head, was a tall silk hat. Standing upright before our amazed friends, the Wogglebug appeared to be fully as tall as the Tin Woodman, and surely no bug in all of the Land of Oz had ever been this big before.
"I don't mean to interrupt," said Tip, "but your sudden and rather different appearance has certainly shocked me, and it may have shocked my friends here as well. But pay no never mind to us staring. We'll be accustomed to your new appearance in no time, I am sure."
"Do not apologize, I beg of you,"
returned the Wogglebug earnestly.
It affords me great pleasure to surprise people. Surely I cannot be classed with ordinary insects, and I am entitled to both curiosity and admiration from those I meet.
You definitely are, agreed His Majesty.
If you will permit me to seat myself in your fine company,
continued the stranger,
I will gladly relate my history. That way you can better be able to understand my unusual, may I say, remarkable appearance.
You can say whatever you want, answered the Tin Woodman, still kind of shocked. So the Wogglebug sat down upon the grass facing the little group of wanderers and told them the following story.
I should probably acknowledge at the beginning of this story that I was born an ordinary Wogglebug. Knowing no better, I used both my arms and my legs for walking, and I crawled around the edges of stones or hid among the roots of grasses with no thought beyond finding a few insects that I could eat for dinner. The cold nights made me stiff and motionless because I didn't have anything to wear. But each morning the warm rays of the sun gave me a new life and restored me to activity. A horrible existence, honestly, but you must remember this is the regular, normal life of every Wogglebug, as well as any other tiny creature that inhabits the earth. But destiny singled me out, humble though I was for a grander fate. One day, I crawled near to a country schoolhouse, and my curiosity was piqued by the monotonous hum of the students within. So I made a bold choice to enter inside the building, and I crept along a crack between two boards until I reached the far end where, in front of a hearth of glowing embers, sat the master at his desk. Nobody noticed me because I was so small as a Wogglebug, and when I found that the hearth was even warmer and more comfortable than the sunshine, I resolved to establish my future home beside it. So I found a charming nest between two bricks and hid myself therein for many, many months. Professor Know-It-All is, no doubt, the most famous scholar in all of the land of Oz, and after a few days I began to listen to the lectures and discourse he gave his pupils. Not one of those students was more attentive than the humble, unnoticed Wogglebug, and I acquired, in this way, a fund of knowledge that I will myself confess is simply marvelous. That is why I place T.E. upon my cards, for my pride lies in the fact that the world simply cannot produce another Wogglebug with 1/10 of my own culture and smarts and education.
I don't blame you, said the Scarecrow. Education is a thing to be proud of. I'm educated myself. My great mess of brains in my head given to me by the Great Wizard is considered by my friends to be unrivaled. Nevertheless, interrupted the Woodman, a good heart is, I believe, much more desirable than educational brains. Well, in my opinion, spoke the Sawhorse, a good leg is way more important than either of those two. Do you think seeds could be considered brains but for me? Inquired the Pumpkinhead abruptly. Keep quiet, demanded Tip. Very well, Father. Sorry, answered the obedient Pumpkinhead. The Wogglebug listened patiently, even respectfully, to these remarks, and then resumed his story.
I must have lived fully 3 years in that secluded schoolhouse hearth, he said, drinking thirstily of the ever-flowing fount of limpid knowledge before me.
Is quite poetic, commented the Scarecrow, nodding his head approvingly.
But one day, continued the Bug, a marvelous circumstance occurred that altered my very existence and brought me to my present pinnacle of greatness. The Professor discovered me in the act of crawling across the hearth, and before I could escape, he caught me between his thumb and his forefinger.
My dear children, he said, I have captured a Wogglebug, a very rare and interesting specimen. Do any of you know what a Wogglebug is?
No, replied all the students. Then the Professor said,
I will get out my famous magnifying glass and throw the insect on a screen in a highly magnified condition so that you can all study carefully its peculiar construction and become acquainted with its habits and manner of life.
Then he took me to a cupboard and he took out a most curious-looking instrument, and before I could realize what he'd done, I found myself up on a screen in a very zoomed-in state, even bigger than you now see me. Then all the students stood up from their chairs, and they moved their heads forward to get a better view of me, and then 2 little girls jumped up on the windowsill so they could see me better.
Behold,
cried the Professor in a loud voice,
This highly magnified wogglebug, one of the most curious insects in its existence.
Now, of course, I'm very educated, and I know exactly what was required of a cultured gentleman when he is introduced to a large group of people. So I stood up and put my hand on my chest and made a very polite bow to the group. Apparently, seeing a bug bow to you is a pretty unexpected thing, so I must have startled them, because one of the girls sitting on the windowsill gave out a big scream and fell backwards in fear, and on her way down, pulled her friend down with her. The professor let out a big cry of horror and rushed towards the door to see if the poor children were hurt. And all of the students followed after him because they all wanted to see if she was hurt as well. And I was left alone in the schoolroom, still in a magically highly magnified state and free to do as I pleased. It immediately occurred to me that this was a good opportunity to escape. I was proud of my big size now. This magnifying glass had turned me into a giant, and now I knew that I could safely travel anywhere in the world while my superior culture would make me a fit associate for the most learned people I might happen to meet. So while the professor picked up the little girls, who were more frightened than they were hurt, off the ground, and all the students were around him trying to see if they were okay, I calmly walked out of the schoolhouse, turned a corner, and escaped unnoticed into a grove of trees that were nearby.
Absolutely wonderful! Exclaimed the Pumpkinhead admiringly.
It was definitely wonderful, that's correct, agreed the Wogglebug. I've never stopped congratulating myself for escaping while I was highly magnified, for even my excessive knowledge would have proved little use to me had I remained a tiny, insignificant insect.
I didn't know before,
said Tip, looking at the Wogglebug with a confused expression,
that insects wore clothes.
Well, that's because they don't when they're little, returned the stranger. But while I was wandering around town, I had the good fortune of saving the life of a tailor. He was so happy that I saved his life, for had he lost his life, it would have been the end of him. So he begged permission to furnish me with the stylish costume I now wear. It fits very nicely, doesn't it?
And the Wogglebug stood up and turned himself around slowly so that everyone could examine his dapper dress. He must have been a very good tailor, said the Scarecrow, somewhat envious. He was definitely good-hearted at any rate, observed Nick Chopper.
But where were you going when you met us just now?
Asked Tip.
Nowhere in particular, was the reply. Although it was my intention soon to visit the Emerald City and arrange a course of lectures to select audiences on the advantages of magnification.
Well, we're on our way to the Emerald City now, said the Tin Woodman. So, if you'd like, you're welcome to come with us. The Wogglebug bowed with a profound grace.
It will give me great pleasure, he said, for nowhere else in the land of Oz could I hope to meet such interesting a group of people.
That is true, Father, acknowledged the Pumpkinhead. We as a group are as interesting as anything I've ever seen before.
But pardon me if this seems a bit forward. Are all of you not rather unusual as well?
Asked the Wogglebug, looking from one another with unconcealed interest. No more unusual than yourself, answered the Scarecrow. Everything in life is unusual until you get accustomed to it.
Such a rare philosophy, exclaimed the Wogglebug admiringly.
Yep, my brains are working well today, admitted the Scarecrow, an accent of pride in his voice.
Then, if you are sufficiently rested and refreshed, should we bend our steps towards the Emerald City?
Suggested the magnified one.
The Sawhorse has a broken leg, so he can't bend his steps at all. And there is no wood around to make him a new limb. And we can't leave the horse behind because the Pumpkinhead is so stiff in his joints that he has to ride him.
How very unfortunate,
cried the Wogglebug. Then he looked over the party carefully and said,
If the Pumpkinhead has to ride on top of the horse, why not use one of his legs to fix the horse? I've noticed that they both seem to be made out of wood.
Now that is what I call smarts, said the Scarecrow approvingly. It's a wonder I didn't think of that idea myself. Nick Chopper, my friend, get to work and cut that pumpkin-headed fellow's leg clean off and attach it to the horse. Jack was not especially pleased with this idea, but he submitted to having his left leg amputated by the Tin Woodman and whittled down to fit the left leg of the Sawhorse. Nor was the Sawhorse especially pleased with the operation either, because he growled a good deal about being butchered, as he called it, and afterward declared that the new leg was a disgrace to a respectable Sawhorse. I beg you to be more careful in your speech, said the Pumpkinhead sharply. Remember, if you please, that it is my leg you are abusing. You're asking me to remember? I can't forget it, retorted the Sawhorse. This leg I've got is just as flimsy as the rest of you. Flimsy? Me? Flimsy? Cried Jack in a rage. How dare you call me flimsy? I called you flimsy because you're built flimsy, sneered the horse, rolling his knotty eye in a vicious manner. Even your head won't stay on straight, and you can never tell whether you're looking backwards or forwards. Hey, team, let's not fight, pleaded the Tin Woodman anxiously. As a matter of fact, none of us are above criticism. So let's bear with each other's faults for the meantime.
That's an excellent suggestion, said the Wogglebug approvingly. You must have an excellent heart, my metallic friend.
Yeah, I do, replied Nick, very pleased. My heart is quite the best part of me. But now, let us start upon our journey towards the Emerald City. Then they perched one-legged Pumpkinhead upon the Sawhorse and tied him to his seat with cords so that he could not possibly fall off. Then, following the lead of the Scarecrow, they all advanced in the direction of the Emerald City. They hadn't been walking for very long before they discovered that the Sawhorse was limping. His new leg was far too long for the rest of his body, so they had to stop and wait while the Tin Woodman chopped his new leg down to size so he could walk a little more comfortably. The Sawhorse, even now, wasn't entirely pleased. It's a shame I had to go and broke my leg, isn't it? Growled the Sawhorse, displeased.
On the contrary,
remarked the Wogglebug.
You should consider this accident the most fortunate thing that's ever happened to you. Because, as everyone knows, a horse is no use unless it's broken.
He looked around the quiet group to see if anyone else was laughing at his joke, but nobody was. Tip broke the silence and said,
I beg your pardon, but that joke is very old and in very poor taste. You shouldn't say these things about my friends.
I understand, but it is still a joke,
declared the Wogglebug firmly.
And a joke derived from a play upon words is considered among educated people to be rather proper and very smart.
And what exactly does that even mean? Inquired the Pumpkinhead quite curiously.
It means, my dear friend, that our language contains many words having a double meaning, and to pronounce a joke that allows both meanings of a certain word proves the person who makes the joke to be of rather important culture and refinement, and who has, moreover, a thorough command of the language. In other words, if you make a good joke, it means you're very, very smart.
I don't believe that,
said Tip quite plainly.
Anybody can make a play on words.
No, that's not very true at all,
rejoined the Wogglebug stiffly.
It requires education of a high order. Are you educated, young boy?
Not especially,
admitted Tip.
Then you're in no place to judge,
said the Wogglebug.
I myself am thoroughly educated. Remember, it says so on my card. I say that puns display genius. For instance, if I were to ride upon this Sawhorse over here, it would not just be a horse, it would now be a horse and buggy.
In the silence following that poor joke, you could almost hear crickets as everyone held their breath. The Scarecrow gave a gasp and the Tin Woodman stopped short and looked reproachfully at the Wogglebug. At the same time, the Sawhorse loudly snorted his derision, and even the Pumpkinhead put up his hand to hide the smile which, because it was carved upon his face, he could not change to a frown. But the Wogglebug strutted along as if he had made some brilliant, highly educated remark, and the Scarecrow felt like he had to say, I've heard that a person can become overeducated. And even though I have a high respect for brains, no matter how they're arranged, I'm beginning to suspect that yours might be slightly tangled. At any rate, I feel I must ask you to restrain your superior education while you're hanging out with us. Yeah, we're not particularly smart, said the Tin Woodman. Yeah, we might not be as intelligent as you are, said the Tin Woodman. Maybe your jokes go over our heads a bit. But we are incredibly kind-hearted, and we don't take kindly to people that make fun of our friends. So, if one of those superior culture jokes rears its ugly head again... The Tin Woodman did not complete his sentence. He simply twirled his gleaming axe between his hands. The Wogglebug looked frightened and shrank away to a safe distance, understanding exactly what the Tin Woodman was trying to say. After that, everybody marched on in silence, and the highly magnified bug, after a period of deep thought, said in a rather humble voice,
I will endeavour to restrain myself.
"That's all we can ask. Thank you," returned the Scarecrow pleasantly. And with everybody in a much better mood, they continued on their way. Later that same night, they stopped again to allow Tip to rest. The boy seemed to be the only one amongst the group that required resting. The Tin Woodman noticed many small round holes in the grassy meadow. "This must be a village of field mice," he said to the Scarecrow. "I wonder if my old friend, the Queen of the Mice, is hanging around this neighborhood. If she is, she might be of a great service to us." The Scarecrow seemed rather impressed by his friend's deep connections with people around the land of Oz, and asked Nick Chopper to call out for her friend. So the Tin Woodman blew a shrill note upon a silver whistle that hung around his neck, and shortly after, a tiny grey mouse popped out from a nearby hole and advanced fearlessly towards them. For the Tin Woodman had once saved her life, and the Queen of the Field Mice knew that he was to be trusted. "Good day, Your Majesty," said Nick politely, addressing the mouse. "I trust you're doing well then?"
"Yes, I'm doing very well, thank you,"
answered the Queen demurely as she sat up and displayed the tiny golden crown upon her head.
"Is there anything I can do to assist one of my oldest friends?"
"Oh, there certainly is," replied the Scarecrow. "Could you please spare a dozen of your subjects to take with me to the Emerald City and take the city back?"
"Will they be injured?"
asked the Queen doubtfully. "I'll promise you your subjects will remain unharmed," said the Scarecrow. "I'll carry them inside the straw that stuffs my body, and when I give them the signal by unbuttoning my jacket, they'll only have to rush out and scamper home as fast as they can. And just by jumping out of my jacket and running back home, they will have assisted me in my attempt to regain the throne."
"Well, I guess in that case, I will not refuse your request. Whenever you are ready, I will call 12 of my most intelligent subjects to your aid."
"We're ready right now," replied the Scarecrow. Then he lay down on the ground, opened up his jacket, and displayed the mass of straw that he was stuffed with. The Queen uttered a little piping call, and in an instant a dozen pretty field mice had emerged from their holes and stood before their ruler, awaiting her orders. Whatever it was that the Queen said to her subjects, none of our friends could understand, for it was in the mouse language, but the field mice obeyed without hesitation, running one after the other into the Scarecrow and hiding themselves in the straw of his chest. When all of the 12 mice had thus concealed themselves, Scarecrow buttoned his jacket back up securely, then he stood up and thanked the Queen for her kindness. "One more thing you might be able to do to serve us," suggested the Tin Woodman. "If you could please go on ahead of us and show us the way to the Emerald City. Evidently, someone is out there trying to prevent us from reaching it, and they're casting spells to do it."
"I will do that quite gladly,"
returned the Queen.
"Are you ready to leave right now?"
The Tin Woodman looked at Tip, and Tip nodded approvingly. So they resumed their journey, and the little grey Queen of the Field Mice ran swiftly ahead and then paused until the travellers drew near, at which point she would then dart ahead. Without the help of the Queen of the Field Mice, the Scarecrow and his comrades might never have reached the Emerald City, for old Mombi had thrown many a different distraction and witchcraft in their way to prevent them from making it to the castle. But as it was with the sunflowers, none of those distractions actually existed. They were all cleverly contrived deceptions. For instance, they came across a rushing river that was moving so fast and so deep that they almost didn't want to cross it. But the little Queen kept steadily walking on, passing through the seeming flood in safety, and our travellers followed her without ever encountering a single drop of water. Then later, a high wall of granite towered over above their heads and opposed their advance. But again, the grey field mouse walked straight through it, and the others did the same, the wall melting into mist as they passed through it. Afterwards, when they had stopped for a moment to allow Tip to rest again, they saw 40 roads branching off from their feet in 40 different directions. And then these 40 roads began whirling around themselves like a mighty wheel, first in one direction and then in another, completely boggling their vision. But the Queen called for them to follow her and darted off in a straight line. And when they had gone a few paces, the whirling pathways vanished and they were seen no more. Mombi's last trick was the most fearful one of all. She sent a sheet of crackling flame rushing over the meadow to consume them, and for the first time in our journey, the Scarecrow became genuinely afraid and turned to run away. "If that fire gets anywhere near me, I'm dead," said the trembling Scarecrow. "Fire is the most dangerous thing I've ever seen in my entire life." "Hold on, I'm coming with you," cried the Sawhorse, turning and prancing with agitation. My whole body's made out of kindling. I'll go up like bonfire. Is fire dangerous to pumpkins? Asked Jack fearfully.
If you go anywhere near that fire, you'll be baked like a pumpkin pie. And so will I,
answered the Wogglebug, scared, getting down on all fours so he could run faster. But the Tin Woodman, being brave as ever, having no fear of fire, averted the stampede by a few sensible words. Look at the field mouse, said the Woodman. The fire isn't hurting her at all. Watching the little Queen Mouse march calmly through the roaring fires restored courage to every member of the party, and they followed her without ever being hurt by fire.
Such wizardry and witchcraft. This is the most exciting adventure I've ever been on,
said the Wogglebug.
I do wonder what will happen next.
You've been listening to The Marvelous Land of Oz, the sequel to The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. You can read the full story on projectgutenberg.org and find past Spin Me a Tale stories on plains.org.nz, Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I'm Jazz. It's been a pleasure reading to you today.